Okay, guys, I thought it would be interesting to take a look at, or listen, in this case, at Keir Starmer's speech at Chatham House today about the Israel-Gaza conflict. As a pagan, I don't side with either. When taken into context the history, I mean, I'm more likely to back Gaza than I am Israel, but I'm not going to back Hamas. Fuck that shit. Not only that, but Israel's right-wing government has been pretty terrible when it comes to Gaza, to be fair. You know, like... yeah, so let's see what he's got to say about it, because a lot of shit has been said about what Starmer's got to say about this. So we'll analyse it.
Thank you, Bronwyn, and thank you all for coming here this morning. And thank you to Chatham House for hosting and for your resolute commitment to dialogue on this issue. An issue that so many people recoil from out of despair. A despair that in the last 3 weeks has arguably reached new depths. Indeed, anyone who has followed this closely and seen images that can never be unseen. Tiny bodies wrapped in bundles in Israel and Gaza. Mothers and fathers shattered by the ultimate grief. The innocent dead. Israeli, Palestinian, Muslim, Jew. It's a tragedy.
I've heard that order of words being said before. Very curious. Yeah. Again, I don't have any stick in the game on this. Like, just let Israel and Palestinians live together. Just let them live democratically together.
Where the facts on the ground are changing by the minute, but where the...
Okay. It's a really nitpicky thing to pick on, but I hate the saying the facts change on the ground. No, the facts don't change. More facts come forwards.
Consequences will last for decades, and the trauma might never fade.
Like, for example, last week this candle was up here. It was full, right? It's a fact that candle was like that. That fact hasn't changed. But now the fact that it is also a fact that it is now like this. Like, the first fact hasn't actually changed. It was that size at that point. That fact hasn't changed. Okay? It's a really nitpicky point, but it bugs me.
A crisis where the search for solutions is shrouded not just by the fog of war, but by an ever-darkening cloud of misinformation. But nonetheless, we must do what we can, and we must explain what we do. Democratic accountability matters, particularly in light of the rising temperature on British streets. Our efforts must respond to the two immediate tragedies. To the 7th of October, the biggest slaughter of Jews, and that is why they were killed, do not doubt that, since the Holocaust. Men, women, children, babies, murdered, mutilated, and tortured by the terrorists of Hamas.
Not sure if the babies were... I don't know about that. Everything I've seen though so far says that that's unconfirmed.
Over 200 hostages, including British citizens, taken back into Gaza. Make no mistake, this is terrorism on a scale and brutality that few countries have ever experienced. Certainly not this one. And that is an immutable fact that must drive our response to these events. As must the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, which again plays out on a previously unimaginable scale. Thousands of innocent Palestinians dead, displaced, desperate for food and water, reduced to drinking contaminated filth, hiding out in hospitals for shelter, whilst in those same buildings, babies lie in incubators that could turn off at any moment. At every stage during this crisis, my approach has been driven by the need to respond to both these tragedies, to stand by the right to self-defense of any nation which suffers terrorism on this scale, alongside the basic human rights of innocent Palestinians caught once again in the crossfire.
Okay, I can. For those who've got a skin in the game on this argument, or those people who are absolutist in their thinking, they're going to take a big problem with this. Just that wording. I don't really have a problem with that wording at all. Not really. I mean, Israeli people as a whole, it's not. No, I don't know whether or not they're anti-Palestinian. There are some sections of Israeli society that is, the government is, but I don't think a lot of them are. I mean, a lot of them blame Netanyahu for this. It's insane. So, I can see why people are getting annoyed. But again, you look at the surrounding evidence of what else is going on, where, the UN actually comes out and fucking directly challenges Israel, and Israel just goes on a fucking hissy fit. How we're supposed to get these people to listen to us if they're going to be like that? So I can see why it's politically speaking more effective to do it this way. It's just a little bit distasteful. It's distasteful. It's distasteful.
To focus at every stage on the practical steps that might make a material difference on the ground. In the short term, on the humanitarian conditions in Gaza and the efforts by Israel to rescue her hostages. But in the future, also to the hope that I know still burns brightly for those who want peace. The two-state solution.
Okay. This is probably one of the biggest things I'll take issue with. I don't agree with the two-state solution. I can't, because in either way, it's inherently unfair. I just don't see how a two-state solution in Israel can actually work, and no one's actually showed me how that could work, like realistically.
An Israel where every citizen enjoys the
What are you going to do? Join Gaza up to the West Bank? That then splits Israel in two.
Security they need, and a viable Palestinian state where the Palestinian people and their children enjoy the freedoms and opportunities that we all take for granted. And that is why While I understand calls for a ceasefire at this stage, I do not believe that it is the correct position now for two
Sorry,
reasons.
I got cold.
One, because a ceasefire always freezes any conflict in the state where it currently lies.
I think there's legitimacy for that. I'll have to have a think about it, but I think I actually think there's some there's legitimacy behind that reasoning.
And as we speak, that would leave Hamas with the infrastructure and the capability to carry out the sort of attack we saw on October the 7th. Attacks that are still ongoing. Hostages who should be released still held. Hamas would be emboldened and start preparing for future violence immediately.
Yeah, I mean, Hamas they're Islamofascists. I'm not going to defend Hamas here. I'm really not. Fucking. The problem is it's the fact that Netanyahu's aim is to take Israel. It is to take Gaza and the West Bank. What he's saying here, though, is correct. I think. If someone can correct me if they think I'm wrong, really go. But I mean, I get why people will call for a ceasefire. I really do. But like, if you call for a ceasefire, is Hamas gonna go for that? It's not just Israel that has to cease fire. Hamas too. Not to say that Israel is less bad than Hamas, the Israeli government is less bad than Hamas, but you know what I mean.
And it is this context which explains my second reason, which is that our current calls for pauses in the fighting for clear and specific humanitarian purposes, and which must start immediately, is right in practice as well as principle. In fact, it is at this moment the only credible approach that has any chance of achieving what we all want to see in Gaza, the urgent alleviation of Palestinian suffering.
See, immediately that screams out to me a short-termism, but I think I get it. Even if they're temporary, the more we can do these pauses, the more chance there is of foreign diplomats getting in and trying to get the two sides to start talking. It's even possible. As a non-absolutist, I think I understand this.
Aid distributed quickly, space to get hostages out. That is why is also the position shared by our major allies in the US and the EU. And I urge all parties to heed its call. Over time, the facts on the ground will inevitably change.
Again, facts don't change, more facts come up.
In relation to both hostages being
I know that sounds a bit more long-winded, but it's more correct.
And Hamas's capability to carry out attacks like we saw on October the 7th. And we must move to cessation of fighting as quickly as possible. Because the reality is that neither the long-term security of Israel nor long-term justice for Palestine can be delivered by bombs and bullets. Open-ended military action, action without a clear and desired political outcome, is ultimately futile.
I think they do have a specific political outcome, Kier. They want to destroy Gaza.
This needs to begin now, because a political agreement, however unlikely that seems today,
Okay.
however painful the first steps are to take, is the only way to resolve this conflict once and for all. That is why our position and our counsel has always been that Israel must submit to the rules of international law. The right to self-defense is fundamental, but it's not a blank check.
Good. Then, given that Israel seems to have done, say something about that.
The supply of basic utilities like water, medicines, electricity, and yes, fuel to civilians in Gaza cannot be blocked by Israel. Every life matters. So
that is challenging Israel's line.
Be taken to protect
not as much as a lot of absolutists would like, but yeah,
civilians from bombardment. Palestinians should not be forced to leave their homes en masse. But where they have no choice but to flee within Gaza, we need crystal clear guarantees that they will be able to return quickly.
Unfortunately, it looks like they can't. And there won't be anything to come back to.
You cannot overstate the importance of this last point. In conflicts like this, the most painful blows are those that land on the bruises of history. And for Palestinians, the threat of displacement sends a shiver down the spine. It must be disavowed urgently, clearly, and by all. Because while it may feel like a truism, so often the trauma of the present leads directly to the tragedy of the future. Hamas know this.
Yeah.
They knew Israel would have to respond. Their aim on October the 7th was not just to kill Jews. It was to bring death upon their fellow Muslims in Gaza. A plan written in blood to isolate Israel from the West, destroy its improving relations with other Arab nations, and ultimately provoke wider regional conflicts across the Middle East. That threat remains real. And I echo President Biden's sage advice to Israel to understand in its own interests why a whirlwind of understandable emotion and rage must not blind it to the fact that it is Hamas it must target. Hamas that is the enemy. Hamas brutality that must be prevented, and not the Palestinian people who must be protected. So I say again, we have to get many more aid trucks across the Rafah crossing. We have to get food, water, electricity, medicine, and fuel into Gaza. We have to preserve innocent lives. Hospitals must be protected and cannot become targets. Across the West, we've been calling for this for weeks, but it hasn't happened. The siege conditions haven't lifted. That's unacceptable, and it cannot continue. The risk of regional escalation is real.
Okay, I wasn't expecting that. Now there are going to be a bunch of people on here that say I'm making I'm trying to make excuses here for Kier. No, I don't make excuses for anyone. I wasn't expecting him to come out and say that. Given what a lot of people have been saying about Sakir, thought he'd play that more carefully. No, he literally come out and went against the Israeli line, the Israeli government's line. Like, that just blatantly is. I'm not sure how you can say that he's a puppet of Israel when he said that. Because Israeli government, Netanyahu will not be pleased that he said that in this forum. Bet you not.
And it must be prevented. This is why millions of people across our country are rightly concerned. Concerned as well about the impact this is having on communities here in Britain. There are some who want us divided, but our approach to multiculturalism is envied around the globe. Jews, Christians, and Muslims live side by side, and this is so ordinary, it's barely remarked upon.
It drives me mad that there's always these Abrahamic communities that get talked about. I mean, we've got a Hindu Prime Minister. Get he doesn't want to speak up about Sunak, I wouldn't. But we've got a Hindu Prime Minister, and the pagan community in this country is growing. We've got a fairly healthy Sikh community as well, I believe. You know, like...
Interfaith marriages are common. People celebrate each other's traditions and festivals as naturally as they do their own.
Not pagan ones.
The freedom of religious expression is uncontroversial. We don't stop often enough to reflect on how unusual this is, how Britain's modern diverse democracy is an existential challenge to people all around the world who say, this cannot be done. Something we've worked hard for through the generations. And that at moments like this, we have a responsibility to fight for. We cannot have a Britain where Jewish businesses are attacked, Jewish schools marked with red paint, Jewish families hiding who they are. We cannot have a Britain where Muslim women feel scared to take public transport, mosques are attacked, Palestinian restaurants receive death threats. No, this isn't our Britain. And in the Labour Party, we will have to reach out to communities under pressure and show them...
Look, as a pagan activist, I'm going to say this one more time and then I'll leave it. I get this is more specifically about the Abrahamic communities, I understand. But I feel it is important that we do not forget the other religious and cultural communities within this country. It's not just Jews, Muslims and Christians. Okay? Right. Enough.
The respect and empathy they deserve as a fundamental British right. But ultimately, the gravest ramifications of failure will of course be felt in the Middle East itself. For too long, the international community has put the Israeli-Palestinian conflict into the too difficult box. There's no recent equivalent of anything like the concerted push for peace we saw in the 1990s and the early 2000s. No, what has happened is we have continually paid lip service to a two-state solution because it's easier, convenient perhaps, to look away. To look away from Gaza, knowing it is controlled by those who want to kill Jews and wipe Israel off the map. To look away from Israel, knowing people live without the security which they deserve, to look away from the West Bank, knowing more settlements are being built against international law.
Fuck you, anyone who says he's a fucking an Israeli stooge. Bollocks. That just blew it right out of the water. You can fuck right off. Now, you can say what you like. You can bitch at me chronically in the comments if you like. I don't care. Starmer is not an Israeli stooge. I've had my misgivings about Starmer, but this... He directly challenged Netanyahu's administration there. Directly challenged it. Alright?
Now, I don't say any of this to start a new round of arguments or hand-wringing. Instead, this must be a time for a new resolve, a renewed push from all parties.
I do like how he included the West Bank as well. Fucking right, yes. I'm not kidding. You can all fuck off if you're going to say that Starmer is exactly the same as Sunak. You can fuck right off.
To find a way to peace. It will mean engaging with our Arab partners, working urgently on viable plans for a Palestine free from the terrorism of Hamas. It will mean engaging with Israel, seeking to address its security concerns in the future, but showing clearly that the settlement building is unacceptable, unlawful, and has to stop.
Netanyahu's going to be going right now.
The Palestinian people need to know.
Can you imagine if he was saying this as Prime Minister? That'd be huge. But no, right now everyone is saying how anti-Palestinian, apparently, Starmer is. Yeah. And how willing he is to back war crimes. Yeah. It's a pile of shite.
There is a genuine will and determination from Israel, from Arab states, from the West, to finally address them.
Not only that, but what U-turn? Because this has been pretty much his line. So, all of this, you know, like, yeah, Israel has the right to defend itself within international law.
Indeed,
I'm not a Starmer fan, so you can fuck off. But he's not wrong in this.
deeds as well as words. Because the Palestinian claim to statehood is not in the gift of a neighbour. It is inalienable right.
Oh, yes. So, if any of Netanyahu's government are watching this, like that, what's she called? Zippy? Fucking bitch. If she's watching this, like if she watched this Starmer speech, she would be going berserk right now with the comments she fucking made.
The Palestinian people and the clear logic of any call for a two-state solution. So my Labour Party will fight for that cause. We will work.
I need to see a legitimate, realistic solution for a two-state solution. Because all I can think of right now is, what, you're going to join Gaza and West Bank up, but then you're splitting Israel into. What are you going to do? Like, make that a bridge? You're going to make a bridge? And people going, well that, like, that's still what if Israel decides to break the bridge? Someone would really have to explain how a two-state solution would work.
Work with international partners towards the recognition of a Palestinian state as part of a negotiated, just, and lasting peace. Because even in the darkest days, in fact, especially in the darkest days, we have to keep alive the light of peace. Fight, despite the horror of the present, for the fragile hope of the future. Focusing always on the difference we can make. This is an old conflict, but it is not and never has been an issue that will be solved by the black and white simplicity of unbending conviction. Rather, the colour of peace, always in conflict resolution, is grey.
He's really speaking to my non-absolutism. I don't think in absolutist terms, by and large, because it's not realistic. It just, it just isn't. I wonder if he's looking at this as a multifaceted thing, that you have to come at this from different angles. I wonder if that's what he means, because that's what I'm kind of getting about this.
And in the coming days and months, we must do everything we can to fight for it. Thank you very much.
Okay. There's some questions, I think.
Kier Starmer, thank you very much indeed for that. Let me just kick off by asking a couple of questions on this vision you've set out. And the first question is what you think Britain can do itself, what influence it still has. You've made a very direct call there for international progress towards a two-state solution, reviving what some people, as I said before, think has long gone. What is it that Britain can do, and what, if you were in number 10 at the moment, would you do?
Well, thank you for that question. I think we've got to look at the short term, the here and now, and that is undoubtedly the urgent question of humanitarian aid. You've only got to see the images on our screens of innocent civilians suffering, dying, hospitals unable to cope, to know that we have to urgently address that issue. And we have to pull together, we have to make that case for humanitarian pauses to allow that aid to get in. It is urgent. It was urgent last week and the week before. This humanitarian crisis has been going on for a very, very long time. So that's the immediate, and to allow and argue for the release of the hostages. They should not have been taken, they should not be held, and Hamas should release them immediately. And so they're the two immediate things that we have to address. But I think Britain also has to address the longer term, because, and I know some people will say, look, in the current context, it's impossible to even think about a two-state solution. I don't accept that. I think that because of the desperation of the situation we're in, we have to start the discussion about a two-state solution. I think.
Right, but I'm sorry, Kier, but for a two-state solution, you need to give me a realistic scenario here. I just don't see that.
That looking away in the last 10, arguably 20 years, has been a dereliction of responsibility, and we have to take up that responsibility, and we have to take it up now. So that's what I would be concentrating on if we were in government now.
And by that you mean taking that to Israel, making those points to Israel and perhaps to Qatar, which is negotiating with Hamas?
Yes, to all, to allies, to partners across the Middle East, to the US. This has to be a concerted effort. I think too many people have looked away and simply said it's too difficult. Knowing what's been going on in Gaza, what's been going on in the West Bank, they've looked away. We cannot justify that any longer.
Thank you for that. Let me ask one more.
Discussion. Basically, bug Israel.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose effectively that's all we can do. I wouldn't. Personally, I'd like to stop sending arms to Israel. It can make its own shit. Thank you very much.
You're a lawyer of legal background, not intending that to be a controversial statement. And From what you've described of Israel's actions at the moment in its justified pursuit of Hamas, do you think it's acting within international law?
It has to act in accordance with international law. This is not an optional extra and nice to have. It has to be in accordance with international law.
Yes or no?
And that is a point that we have repeatedly pressed on Israel, and other countries have pressed on Israel. It has to act in accordance with the law. As to whether each and every act is in accordance with the law, well, that will have to be adjudicated in due course. I think it's unwise for politicians to stand on stages like this or to sit in television studios and pronounce day by day which acts may or may not be in accordance with international law. I think it's not the role of politicians. I don't think it's wise to do it. I come with the benefit of a lawyer of having litigated about issues like this in the past. And in my experience, it often takes weeks or months to assimilate the evidence and to then work out whether there may or may not have been a breach of international law. So I think the call for politicians to look at half a picture.
Yeah. Okay, I think he's actually speaking out against reactionary thinking here. He's being very wordy about it, but there's a big part of me that kind of disagrees that, you know, Israel is breaking international law. However, him being a lawyer, he probably has that kind of... It wouldn't surprise me that this is the kind of instinct he's going on. Interesting. Okay. I need to be convinced of that argument.
On the screen without the full information and form an instant judgment as to whether it's this side of the line or the other side of the line is extremely unwise, and I'm not going to get involved in that kind of exercise. Thank you.
Basically, I'm not going to get involved in absolutism. I can get on board with that.
Thank you for that. I could ask you a follow-up, but that would take us into the question of international law itself and why Israel has to do that. Instead, I'm going to release you to ask and pick your own questions from release you to the media, and I will come up again at the end.
Thank you very much, Bronwyn, and I'll go straight to the media. I've got a list, I think, of all those that want to ask a question, and I'll try and get through just as many as I possibly can. I think first we've got Vicky Young at the BBC.
Thank you very much. In about a year's time, you are hoping to be Prime Minister. If that happens, will you allow your own ministers to undermine your authority and publicly disagree with you on the most important issues of the day?
Look, collective responsibility is really important. There's no doubt about that, as is unity. And what is really important in answering this question and addressing this point is to understand what is driving people at the moment. I think it's impossible for anyone to see the suffering that we're seeing in Gaza and not feel compelled to try to do something about it. And that's why I said in my short speech that I understand why people are asking for a ceasefire. But equally, I do not think that a ceasefire now is the right way forward for the reasons I set out. So there is unity here. I'm obviously engaging with my front benchers, but there is unity, and what we want to see, which is the alleviation of the awful situation in Gaza. It is for me to address collective responsibility. I recognise that is my duty. It matters, and I take that duty extremely seriously. But I do it in the context of understanding what is driving people in the call for a ceasefire, which is, in my judgment, not the call that we should be making as things stand for the reasons I set out. Thank you, Vicky. Anushka, ITV.
Keir Starmer, the reason that dozens of Labour MPs are urging you to call for a ceasefire is because over 3,000 children are dead. Because you haven't done that today, we know that shadow ministers are considering resigning. The mayors of London and Manchester disagree with you. The leader Labour in Scotland says that you have hurt Muslim communities. How on earth are you going to bring your party back from this level of division?
Well, we've all seen those images of children dead, and there's no unseeing those images. And I think it's really important to understand that. For the reasons I set out, notwithstanding that I do understand why some are calling for a ceasefire, I do not think that that is the right call now, because it does freeze the situation as it currently is. And if we freeze the situation as it currently is, that means that Hamas is left with the capability to carry on with the sort of attacks it carried out on the 7th of October and is continuing to carry out. It is still attacking. And of course, it is holding 200 plus hostages. You cannot freeze that situation without effectively denying a sovereign state its self-defense. But allied to that, and to alleviate the thing that is driving others to argue for a ceasefire, the humanitarian pauses to allow aid in are the practical, workable, viable solution that could be implemented realistically.
It seems here that I know he's going to get challenged on this. It seems like he's trying to be non-absolutist about this, because it's a situation where everyone's trying to be absolutist and is taking a side one way or the other. Starmers not trying to do that, but that's what I see it as anyway.
In the near future, to allow that to happen. So for both of those reasons, my strong argument is that a ceasefire is not right now because it freezes the situation. Humanitarian pauses allow for an alleviation of the awful situation on the ground. Thank you, Anushka. I've got Paul from Channel 4.
Thank you, Kier. But we've seen untold death and destruction in Gaza. Thousands of children lost their lives. The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees has lost 63 of their staff members since October 7th. That's 63 UN workers dead since October 7th. Are you saying that Israel's actions in Gaza at the moment are justifiable? And
Okay, this is an important one.
if so, where do you draw the line, Keir Starmer?
Well, firstly, in relation to your description of the aid workers and NGOs, Lisa and Andy and I met some of the NGOs just days ago, and they described to us the conditions in which they are trying to work. They described to us staff members who had lost members of their family, one staff member searching through the rubble in Gaza to try to find his 13-year-old niece who was dead. And I have a 12-year-old girl, and you can't be unmoved by those stories. The question is not how awful is that, because it is truly awful. The question is, what is the most practical way to do something about it? And that's why I said in my speech I've been driven by the response to the October the 7th tragedy and to the humanitarian tragedy, but also bearing in mind what is practical that will make a material difference on the ground. And I think it's humanitarian pauses, particularly with other countries, allied countries, the US, etc.
Okay? Look past the fingers. I think that's exactly what he's doing. Look past the fingers. Look past the immediate shock factors. How do we deal with this realistically? Practically? I need to be convinced that what he's saying is actually correct, but the thinking behind it, I think, is sound.
Making that
argue with me if you want.
They are the practical way to achieve that. So I'm not quarrelling with the need to address that. I am saying what is the best way, the right way to address that in the circumstances as they are. And my answer to that is humanitarian pauses for the specific purpose of aid and provision into Gaza, but not a ceasefire that actually leaves Hamas in a position to continue what it is doing now, continue attacking, to continue holding hostages, and have the capability of doing what it did on October the 7th again. That cannot be now, at this point, the right answer to the awful suffering that we see in Gaza. Thank you very much, Paul. Tamara. Sky.
Tamara Cohen from Sky News. So, Kier, would you accept that this issue is tearing your party apart? You have made clear you don't support a ceasefire. If senior figures in your party continue to call for one, will they face any consequences? And can I also ask, you've backed the government's plan for humanitarian pauses. What, if anything, do you think the government are getting wrong in their response to this crisis?
Tamara, on tearing the party apart, I think it's very important to recognise the unity in the Labour Party on the key issues. There's unity in trying to bring about an alleviation of the awful situation in Gaza. So nobody in the Labour Party is making any other case than that we have got to alleviate the suffering. We have got to speak out for Israel's right to self-defence, and we've got to alleviate the suffering. So there's complete unity on that. There is also unity not just on the short term, but what is the long-term answer to this, and that is the two-state solution. We had a big affirmation of our policy, a united affirmation of our policy in July of this year, that the two-state solution is the only way forward. So there is, we're not tearing the party apart, there's unity on that. There are differences of view on how you achieve that, and that's why I say I understand why people argue for a ceasefire, but I do not think that is the right argument at this time. But we need to focus on where that unity is. It is my responsibility to ensure collective responsibility. I accept that. And we do need collective responsibility, and I take that duty extremely seriously. In relation to the government, look, the government is sharing intelligence with us on a regular basis, for which we are grateful. And at the moment, we are making the same calls to Israel, to others in the region, and with our allies. We are all talking to the Americans, to Middle East leaders, to Israel, as you would expect. And at this stage, when, bearing in mind, over 200 people are being held hostage, I don't think for me trying to find points of difference with the government is what the families of those hostages most want to hear. We met some of them just 2 weeks ago with harrowing stories of what has happened, and their
this
fears.
Is a little bit of a fight back
understandable.
against people.
And they urged on us that the United Kingdom stand as united and strong as it can in support of their right to have their loved ones back. And I heed what they say in answering your question. Thank you. Lee, Jewish News.
Good morning, Kier. It's fair to say I've been contacted by dozens of Jewish newsreaders over the past few weeks, and the majority have been deeply impressed with the leadership you've shown over this crisis. But what I am also receiving are messages now from people very concerned about the MPs within your party who continue to speak at the mass Palestine demos that are taking place in London and other cities across the globe. Now, nobody is using, it's fair to say, the sort of language the Home Secretary used yesterday. But they are worried about, on the fringes of these demos, there's real examples of hate and extremism that is leaving the Jewish community in this country petrified. What would your message be today to those Labour MPs who continue to speak at these demos?
Well, I think, Lee, we've all seen the images of the various demonstrations and protests, etc. And what I'd say is that where there's evidence of offences being committed, then obviously it's for the police to act on that. And obviously that's difficult for them on the ground, but they must do so. And the full weight of the law needs to be exercised against those who are committing offences, and that's a matter for the courts, and they will have our full backing in that. But the job of the police is to identify those offences, to make arrests where that's appropriate, but also to facilitate peaceful protest by those that want to have their voice heard. And it's getting that balance right that matters. And that's the context in which I answer your question, because both of those things have to happen, and they are difficult judgment calls that have to be made on the ground by the police. I spent 5 years working with the police service in Northern Ireland.
That's not what he asked.
Who were deeply involved in other protests and know how difficult a job that is on the ground for police officers. Where they do identify offences, they should arrest and there should be prosecutions and they should have our full backing. But equally, we do need to recognise that the right to peaceful protest is a cherished right in this country, and we shouldn't give it up, and we should facilitate those that want to express their view. Thank you, Lee. I've got Kieran from The Guardian.
Hi, Kieran Stacey from The Guardian. I understand you don't want to comment on what you think is legal or illegal under international law, and I understand your reasons for saying that you don't think an immediate ceasefire is the practical way to go. But I think what a lot of your members and MPs are hoping for is a clearer distinction on what you believe to be morally justifiable and not morally justifiable in terms of the actions that Israel is taking right now. So I'd like to give you two specific cases. One, the communications blackout for 36 hours that meant that innocent people in Gaza could not call the emergency services when they were the victims of shelling. And number two, telling people to move south of Wadi Gaza and then sending rockets south of Wadi Gaza to where people have evacuated. Are those two things morally justifiable? Not legal or illegal, but are they moral?
Well, Kieran, I'm not going to break the rule I've just set out for myself in terms of not immediately adjudicating on each and every issue. But look, on the comms blackout, I think everybody was concerned about the comms blackout, and concerns have been raised in relation to that, understandably, for reasons that everybody will understand. And equally, the moving of people. And that's why I said in my remarks that where people, Palestinians, feel that they have to flee, it is very important and made absolutely clear without any ambiguity that that is with a view to returning because of the history that lies behind this. So, I think in the words I've just set out in the 15 minutes or so that I spoke for, it's clear where I'm coming from on this. As it is on humanitarian aid, we have been saying now for a long time in the 3 weeks or so that we've had, that aid needs to get in, and that withholding water, food, medicines and fuel is not acceptable and has to be addressed. So I don't think reading and hearing what I've just said in the last 15 minutes can leave many people in much doubt about what I think should happen. But what I'm not going to do is adjudicate on each and every example that people may understandably want to put to me to answer. I've got Ahmed from the Muslim News, please.
Ahmed Zassi from Muslim News. Overwhelmingly, members of the United Nations General Assembly, voted for ceasefire. More than 70% of the public in this country, according to YouGov poll, want a ceasefire. We have a majority of the people in the world wanting a ceasefire because they want to stop killing of civilians and also of children. I mean, we've heard more than 9,000 Palestinians have been killed. More than 4,000 Palestinian children have been killed. Surely the lives are very important. Should you not listen to the overwhelmingly the public in this country and across the world and support the ceasefire? The discussions which are taking place in the Arab and the Muslim world and in the global South is that the West does not care for a Palestinian life. For the West, Palestinian life is worth less than the Israeli one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Look, I'm not surprised by evidence that the vast majority of the public in this country, and no doubt in other countries, want to see an alleviation of the suffering in Gaza. That is a human response that I share. And I've not spoken to anybody who doesn't share that emotional response to what is happening. And therefore, I'm not surprised about the levels of support for anything, if you like, that would bring about, in the eyes of the public, an alleviation of that suffering. The question I'm addressing is a ceasefire right if it leaves Hamas with the capability to continue to attack and carry out similar attacks to October the 7th, and when it holds 200 hostages? Then my answer to that is no. But it doesn't mean, therefore, I leave the question there, nothing can be done, because I immediately go on to address the question, well, in what way can that suffering be alleviated? In what way can we ensure that civilians are not caught up and targeted in this? How do we get that aid in? And that is through humanitarian pauses. I haven't seen the polling on humanitarian pauses to allow aid in. I would be surprised if the vast majority of people in this country and other countries don't equally say, if that's a way, a practical solution, a practical way, the most likely.
I think a lot of good people are going to grate against this. It's very reactionary mindset going around. I think people are going to grate against this. Being a non-absolutist, I really see where he's coming from, but I don't think it's going to relieve the worries of people who are already taking absolutes.
Likely way to alleviate the suffering and to get aid in, then we should be doing it. On the second point of your question, let me be absolutely clear. Each life matters. Each life is equal. And I don't look at an image of an Israeli child dead or a Palestinian child dead and distinguish between the two. I've got children. Many people will feel this as a human emotion. Each of those pains me, and I think pains equally the vast majority of people in this country, and we have to be absolutely clear that each life is valued equally, and the loss of any single innocent civilian life is equally valued and equally impactful in our response. Thank you, Ahmed. Can I go to Ben at the Mirror? Ben.
Thank you, Kier. In your speech, you talked about the rising temperature on British streets. How worried are you about violence here and even the potential for a terrorist attack as a consequence of what's going on? And also, just to be clear, on collective responsibility, are you going to sack these front benchers who've broken collective responsibility?
Look, on the Islamophobia, the anti-Semitism that is going up in this country, yes, of course I'm concerned. The numbers have gone up hugely. And it shocks me that Jewish schools have had red paint painted on their walls, that Jewish families are having to, or feel they have to, hide their identity, that Muslim women are telling me they don't feel safe going on public transport, that mosques are telling me we are having to ramp up our security, that Muslims are saying we are being held to account for things that others have done that are nothing to do with us. I am worried about that. And I think that all of us, but particularly politicians, have a duty to work in all of our communities to ensure that we tackle that sort of hate crime, that sort of hate head on. That is a cross-party, I've said this in Parliament, that is without distinction. We all have a voice, we all have a responsibility to deal with it. On the question of collective responsibility, of course that matters. It is my responsibility to handle that within our party, and I take that responsibility seriously. But as I say, there is unity in the desired end that everybody in the Labour Party wants, which is to alleviate the suffering that we can all see, talk about, hear about, and listen to. And that is why I've set out today what I think is the right, practical and achievable route to that as quickly as possible. Can I take David Rose from the Jewish Chronicle?
Yeah, I'm not uncomfortable with that answer. Other people might be, but
as time is going by, more and more evidence is emerging of Iran's role in coordinating the original attacks of October the 7th. It's established fact that Iran is one of Hamas's principal sources of funding. It's also suggested it helped train
And Netanyahu.
those responsible for the pogrom of October the 7th, and may indeed have deliberately wanted the Israeli response that was surely inevitable once that took place. I wondered what is your current assessment, given the information that you have access to, of how important Iran has been in this? How would you approach dealing with this issue as Prime Minister at a strategic level? And as a specific, would you continue to call for the prescription as a terrorist organisation of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps?
Let me answer that as carefully as I can, because, as I mentioned, we've been having quite high-level intelligence briefings that the government's been providing to us, which obviously I can't disclose. I think my response would be that we all have a duty to make sure that this does not escalate, and it easily could. And in fact, Hamas want it to escalate. It is one of their driving purposes, which is why myself and others are having contact at the highest level in across the globe with countries that are most engaged here to try and ensure that that escalation doesn't happen. Beyond that, I won't say, because I end up disclosing some of the material that there's.
Okay, it's just been said. I'm not going to carry on from here. There's like a good 10 minutes left, and I can't be bothered to do another 10 minutes. Okay, I need to still be convinced on two-state solution on a realistic, practical level. I need to be convinced properly of the direction that he wants to move in. But I do think I will say what he said appeals to my non-absolutist way of thinking. So, he's looking at. If I'm right, he's possibly looking at this from a multifaceted approach. That's not me doing mental gymnastics either. I think, and especially with this sort of thing, that being absolutist is stupid. And it's reactionary, and it's more of a right wing thing than a left wing thing, and we should really make that a thing. But yeah. So yeah, that's my reaction to Keir Starmer's speech at Chatham House. I'm not against what he said here, but I need more convincing. I will say that. So yeah, well, this has been One Angry Pagan, Shadow Eater. I'm ill. Bless the Thursday people, and bless the Sun.